available to other people. And I'm also going to do the screen share. Okay, so here is these are our opening prayers. So tonight we're just going to do two short opening prayers. And because we have a talk tonight that is going to be long, and I don't want to, I want to be able to complete it in the one evening and still have some time for questions and answers. So we'll begin by reciting the short refuge prayer, which is here. So this short refuge prayer, we take refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So as we progress along with our 8-week classes of the Cycle of Buddhism 101, we'll give more explanation about these different prayers as we go along. So tonight is the first night, and really it's a kind of a bonus night where we're talking about the life of the Buddha. Who is the Buddha? So I want to recite this prayer. So everybody, please turn off your microphones so that we don't feed back on each other, and recite this prayer out loud with us all. We recite it twice in English and once in the Tibetan. So nobody can pronounce the Tibetan properly. Don't worry about it. We make our best effort at it, and it kind of vibrates with the Buddha, for the Buddha taught in these languages. So it's good to have that same vibration going through our lives. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Sangye chodang so ke dun la. Excuse me. Start it again. Sangye chodang so ki chodam la. Zhangzhu bardu dagni kapsuchi. Dagi jinso ki pe sonamgi. Drola penshir sange jupasho. And the next prayer is called the Four Immeasurables. These are the four vast immeasurables of the holy enlightened mind, or bodhicitta: loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity are the four vast immeasurable qualities of bodhicitta, the enlightened mind. So we recite this prayer. May all mothers, sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mothers, sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. In Tibet, Manam kadam yam pe sem chen tam she dewa dang dewe gurdang dempar jorchi. Dug now dang dunel gi gu dang drawar jorchi. Dug now me pe dewa dang mi drawar jorchi. May ring chak dang ni dang drawe dang namla ne par jorchi. Okay, thank you. So for tonight, those will be our two opening prayers. So, as I said, we're going to talk about the life of the Buddha. Who was the Buddha? The Buddha, the historical Buddha, lived 2,600 years ago. And he was born in what is now Nepal. It was northern India then. And so his father was a king. His mother, of course, was a queen. And he was raised as a prince. So we're going to look at this from a couple different points of view. One of the things about Buddhism is that there is this historical story that has been passed down to us these past 2,600 years. So the question comes up, well, how valid is this? You know, where is the history as opposed to where is the mythology and so on? And there may be some areas where there's a little grayness, where there's a little bit of crossover and so on. So we have to take this with an understanding that the stories, that the mythology of this is speaking to the spirituality of what this means, and that our point of view may be very, very narrow if we can't see it, if we can't weigh it, if we can't measure it, we can't hold it. It doesn't exist as being true. Many of these mythologies and so on are based on a spiritual value, spiritual occurrences, spiritual experience, and so on. So there may be a little bit of saying, "Oh, well, that possibly can't happen," because we can't see the analogy of it, or we can't see that it's talking about something that is between the lines, so to speak. So we have to keep an open mind, keep an open heart with these stories and so on, and begin to experience them in our own way, and keep the meaning open for ourselves. So the history and the mythology, there is a philosophy that is being transmitted, and the philosophy is handed down from teacher to student, who then becomes a teacher, who then has students, who then become teachers, and so on like that. And this philosophy has been written down, and it's locked up. It's not locked up, but it's been recorded in many, 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 many books. And that's one of the wonderful things about Buddhism, I think, is that all this textual information is available. There's so much stuff that's available about the history of Buddhism and how it's progressed, and from one place in India all the way around the world and so on. So there's this philosophy, and the philosophy has a certain doctrine to it. And this doctrine is not to be considered like a dogma that is so rigid, but it's an open kind of an evolution. It's something that we all, it can become contemporaryized, if you will. It can fit into wherever and whoever we are, whatever nation we live in, at whatever time in history we live, and so on. It can be viewed from those points of view and so on. So there's a doctrine that is continuous through all these many, many years, and through all these different places in which the Buddhism has been taught and practiced. So there's this core that remains the same. And if you attend any of the teachings that is done by the Tibetans themselves or the other teachers, you will find that they always have their reference books, and that they are quoting from the reference books. They are teaching from these reference books. And many of these books are 1,000 years old, 1,500 years old. They're very old, and they will then give commentary on what those particular books or passages of those books might mean to them or could mean to us, and so on. They give a commentary, but not until after they have read the actual books themselves. So maintaining this doctrine, maintaining the validity of these teachings is very important. Then there is the practices, the ways in which Buddhism is integrated into our human story, into our humanness, into our lives, and so on, the way it's done. And that is, it really depends on where we live, what time we live, the way in which it's been adjusted for contemporary people and so on in different places. It basically is the same. The teaching is the same, but the way in which it's practiced may vary from nationality to nationality, from different people, and so on. So we talk about that. But again, we have to keep an open mind about this and let ourselves experience all these variables, all these choices. And then there are the cultures. The cultures then are bringing all this together that has grown up and started in India. Then from India, it went down to southern India. It went over to what was called Ceylon. And then from Ceylon, it went over to Southeast Asia and to Burma and to Thailand and to Vietnam. It went over into those nations, but it also went up and moved up through northern India and over through the Stanic countries. They were all collectively called Buddhistan. Buddhistan means a land, like Kurdistan, Turkestan, Uzbekistan. All those nations there, all have a strong Buddhist background to them. So it was called Buddhistan by some people at some time, and this was all cultural. And then the Buddhism also went across India and made its way into China and made its way into Japan and to Korea. And then from the north, it went over into Mongolia. And it did all that all before it got to Tibet. It didn't get to Tibet until 800 or so AD. So by that time, it had moved all around all these other parts of Asia and so on. And now it's moved into Europe, and it's moved into the Western Hemisphere, to America, and has become very, very popular with a lot of people. And integrating more and more into our culture and so on. So we can see that there are these cultural differences where the modes of the way people live are different, and the way that the Buddhism has kind of assimilated in and makes sense. So there's been a morphing, where it comes from one place, it comes into another culture, but then those cultures kind of morph together. And Tibetan Buddhism is a really great example of that, because in Tibet, there was this indigenous shamanistic tradition that was in Tibet for many, many, many hundreds, thousands of years. And then when the Indian Buddhism came in, there was a little bit of friction, there was a little bit of conflict, there was a little bit of disassociation. But one of the great teachers realized that the way to integrate this was to allow these two great traditions to morph together and create Tibetan Buddhism. So that was a magnificent thing. And so much of what we study today in our tradition is the Tibetan Buddhism. What's happening now, and only in the past, 60, 70 years, since 1959 or so, has Buddhism moved out from Tibet and gone out into the world. Tibetan Buddhism has gone out into the world. And what we're experiencing now is the first time that the Eastern philosophies and the Western philosophies have really come together in our lifetime. And we could come back maybe in 500 years from now or 1,000 years from now and see how these two have morphed together. And so we're this blending, this natural way of things coming together. So a lot of this depends on who we are, how we bring this Buddhism into our lives, how we teach it to our children, and how it's introduced to our children's children and all the subsequent generations and so on. So that's right now, it's up to us. And so a lot of this has to do with being able to bring this into our society, into our culture, and be able to really live this. So by understanding the Buddha and understanding who the Buddha was, why he did the things that he did, and how it is that he began to teach becomes fundamental to this whole process. And we can see our own selves as the Buddha. And the Buddha taught that we all have Buddha nature within ourselves, that we're not exclusive of that. The Buddha nature is within us, that purity of spirit and so on. And it's a question of recognizing it and being able to live an enlightened life. And that's what we're trying to do. So the Buddha, like I said, was born 2,600 years ago. Before I begin, does anybody have any questions or comments? Okay, very good. So the Buddha, his mother was a queen, and she was visited in the middle of the night during a dream by a great elephant who had 6 tusks. And this elephant told her that she was going to become pregnant with a great being who was going to grow to become either a great leader of human beings, either in a spiritual way or in a royal way, to become a great being like a king and so on. The father was to be a king. There was no question about that. So he was either going to follow in the family royal tradition or he was going to be a spiritual being. So she kept this to herself. And it wasn't too long after that that she did indeed become pregnant, of course, by her husband, who was the king. And that was wonderful. And there was a lot of expectation that there was going to be a great child that was going to be born. So, in the custom of India at that time, especially in the royal families, the woman who was about to have a baby would go to her family to have the birth. That they would travel wherever they were and so on. So this was a entourage that was leaving from the king's palace, royal palace, to Maya Devi's. That was the mother's name was Maya Devi, to her home, which was a few days travel by foot and so on, getting to there, so that she could have the child. But along the way, she started having contractions. She started having, the pains of birth and so on. So they stopped in a little village called Lumbini in what was India, but is now Nepal. And the custom was also that women would hold on to the branches of a tree. And there was this particular tree called a sal tree, S-A-L. It was like an apple tree or something like that. It didn't have, it had branches that were relatively low and that someone could hold on to. And then the woman would kind of crouch down a little bit, and then her attendants would help birth the baby. So the queen, was in this position to try and have the child. She was having a very difficult time. So the story goes on that they realized that she was in trouble, and they had to do something to help relieve her of the pain that she was having and not being able to have a normal birth of the child. So they said that they cut a slit in her side, and that the baby was actually born through this slit. So how this got translated over the many years and so on. Was this like a cesarean section? We can only imagine, but nevertheless, this is the story of how this birth happened. And the baby was born, and the baby was strong enough and was able to stand and was able to take 7 steps as it was born, right after it was born. And each of those 7 steps, each one of the flowers came up with each one of the footfalls. And he got to the 7th step and he raised his hand and he said, "This is my last life. I am here to bring enlightenment to all beings, and that this will be a great life for all beings to be able to share in. Something to that effect. So then all of a sudden, of course, he became a normal infant again, and everybody was, the entourage was just overwhelmed with bliss and happiness, and it was wonderful. So there was a pond there, and they bathed the baby in the pond, and I guess Davy went into the pond to clean herself up and everything, and so they had this big entourage. There was a lot of people there. There was women attendants and men attendants and so on like that. And they stayed there for some time. It's not clear, whether they went back to the palace or they continued on to Maya Devi's home where her family was. It's not clear. It's not said. But she passed away in 7 days. So we can only imagine that there might have been some kind of an infection, there was some kind of contamination, there was some kind of bleeding that couldn't be stopped or something like that. But here is the newborn child who now is motherless from his natural mother and so on. So the story picks up again when they're back at the palace, and of course the king is just overwhelmed with having this boy child who 2,600 years ago, that was a wonderful thing to now have the lineage of the royal family to be continued by a boy child is very prized. But of course he was saddened about his wife passing away, but there was no lack of attention. There was no lack of people taking care of the infant, because there were lots of family that was there. There was brothers and sisters, royal brothers and sisters, to take care of the child and so on. So it wasn't too long after that the king, called together to have the great wise men come. And this is an interesting part of the story because it's a lot like our Christian, story about when Jesus Christ was born. The wise men came, and in this case, the wise men came and examined the baby and everything, and they all agreed that this was going to be a magnificent child who is either going to be a great leader of human beings by being a royal person or by being a great spiritual person. So this was the same story, this was the same prophecy that this white elephant had told the mother, before she even became pregnant. And she never shared this, with the king at the time. I guess she must have told it to other people for the story to continued or something. But nevertheless, this is the way it's been told that these wise men said the same thing. So the king, he insisted, he said, well, this child is going to be a royal child. This child is going to be king. This child is going to be raised to be a great warrior. This child is going to be a great politician of the time, whatever they might call them, and so on. And I don't want him to be a spiritual being. And this child is never going to see anything unpleasant, anything disgraceful, anything terrible. The child is not to leave the grounds of the palace. And the palace was this great, big, beautiful, structure, and it had these great courtyards that were all around it and so on. So there was no lack of space for people to be able to go outside and enjoy the grounds and so on like that. But it did have a wall around it, and it had great gates that would, only be opened at certain times for certain people. And there was, the king said at the penalty of death, the child is not to leave the palace grounds. So this became part of the zeitgeist of growing up in northern India like that. So during the time that the Buddha was growing up, his name was Siddhartha Gautama. Gautama was like the family name, and they were part of a clan. The clan was called the Sakya clan. Saya, Sakya clan, and the family name was like Gautama, and his name was Siddhartha, and that's how he was known as Prince Siddhartha. So he's growing up in the palace, and he has the benefit of all the best teachers and the best teachers of language and of whatever mathematics, whatever it is that they can learn 2,600 years ago. And he was a very good student, of course. And he was also learning martial arts. He was learning archery. He was learning swordsmanship. He was learning to be a leader. And he was also being groomed to be a great negotiator among people. You know, family problems come up, different disputes come up with land, you know, for the subjects of the king and so on. So he had to be a great a great arbitrator of that for his subjects. So he's being trained as that. So he learned uh, a lot about palace intrigue. He learned about, you know, how people deal with each other. And of course, this was a monarchy. His word, or his father's word, was the final word, but he was learning to be able to use that kind of power and so on. So he knew what that meant. From early on, he was learning that. And he was also learning how to be a warrior. He was learning games. He was learning how to have war games and so on. And there was no lack of cousins and other children around because, as you can imagine, the king not only had his royal family, but part of the royal family was his harem. So in the harem, he had many, many wives and so on. And of course, there were many, many children and so on like that. So, so Prince Siddhartha was at the top of that hierarchy. He was to be the king, and so he was presented with all his playmates and so on as being his subjects. But nevertheless, you know, they're learning all the martial arts. They're learning how to do all the different things, ride horses and do all the things that military people would do. And he was very, very good at it. There were times when, you know, in the mode of combat, play combat, people would get hurt. They might fall off of horses. They might, you know, fall down and hurt themselves. They might, you know, somebody might strike them very hard and break something, or and all that unpleasantry was just carried away. You know, it had to leave the palace because the palace was supposed to be a perfect place that didn't see any unpleasantness, anything like that. So when something like that would happen, Siddhartha, you know, would see it, but then it would be gone. So it kind of be out of his mind. But then also, as he grew older, because there was, you know, all these attendants, and the father had his harem, but the prince had his attendants. And all his pleasures, everything was taken care of for him as he was growing up, as you might imagine, and so on, and things that we might have seen in other kinds of stories like this. So he was being well taken care of. He had beautiful clothing, and he was just um, spoiled in so many different ways. So he was used to this, and he would see that there was, you know, games that could be played between the courtiers, if I'm not pronouncing that right, the people in the court, the royal court, to vie for his attention. You know, so there was jealousy, there was envy, there were games that were being played, mental games and so on like that. So he would see that, and he was part of that. So this was the atmosphere in which he was growing. So by the time he got to be 12, 13 years old, it was time for him to get married. This was very typical of the time. I mean, people, many of these people wouldn't live to be more than 30, 40 years old. To be 50, 60 years old was quite old. And so it was time for him to meet a prospective bride. So the king calls for a great festival, and then all the other royal families that were all northern India and everything were to bring their eligible daughters to come and meet Siddhartha and see that he could pick his choice who would be his bride. So these festivals would go on for days, as you could imagine, and they're beautiful, lavish, and like that. And after several days, Siddhartha hadn't picked anybody, hadn't found anybody that he felt was suitable or anything. So there was a little bit of disappointment in the air, but as you might expect a story like this, at the last day of the festival, this beautiful young girl shows up with her father from a distant, village or whatever, and they had to be some kind of aristocracy about them. They had to be some kind of royalty about them, so they were of noble birth and so on. And they show up, and as you would expect, that Yashodhara was her name, Yashodhara, and Siddhartha hit it off right from the beginning, and they they met and enjoyed their company, their sharing company, and so on, and they were to be married. So after some short period of time, there was now another festival for the marriage festival, and so they're like 13, 14 years old. So this goes on, and Siddhartha is now a teenager, and he's learning his royal skills much better. He's becoming a better warrior. He's learning to be a better negotiator, and he still has now. He's got his attendants. He's got his little harem. Plus, he's got his bride and so on. So he's very well taken care of in all those respects. And but there's a disappointment because Yashodhara has not become pregnant during these years of their being teenager, and all through these years, there's nothing happening with that in terms of her becoming pregnant. So there is that concern. So so Prince Siddhartha, he starts wondering about what's on the other side of the gates. He wants to understand what's more than just this palace. He sees these people, around him, and then he sees people kind of disappear sometimes, where do they go? And one of the questions of the time was, how is it that what is the truth? What is this? We have our physical body, we have our intellectual body, but there's talk about this spiritual body. There's a religion there. It's a early like a Jainism or a Hinduism, and they talk about nirvana. So and truth and Siddhartha wants to know, well, what is the truth of this? How do you experience? What does this mean? And so on. So he's getting kind of, classic answers that are very, not very deep, very superficial. And he's not feeling very satisfied the older he gets. And he's wondering about, well, what's on the other side of the gates? And maybe there's something else to life that I should expose myself to, and so on like that. So he's got one of his particular male attendants who's very close with him. And he says, I want to go outside the gates. And the attendant says, oh, no, he says, we can't do that. He says, if I take you outside the gates, the king is going to kill me. He's going to chop off my head, certainly. And he says, no, no. He says, we will go in the middle of the night. Nobody will know that we're going. We'll be back in time. Nobody will miss us. But I want to go out and I want to see what it's like on the other side of the wall. So he persists in convincing his attendant to take him outside the gates. So they go out, and once they get outside the gates, and not too far down the road there, of course it's a dirt road, paved road and everything, and there's a village that is all out there. But as they are approaching the village, the outskirts of the village, they're seeing all these people that are crying, that are writhing about in the on the ground, that are in the dirt, and they have all kinds of misshapen limbs and appear to be in complete physical misery and so on. And Siddhartha says to his attendant, he says, "Who are these people? What is going on here?" He says, "Oh, well, these are people that have been injured in battle, or they've hurt themselves while they were working, or they were born this way with these deformities or something like that, and they take up their living space here near the gates of the palace because all the extra food that comes out of the palace that isn't eaten gets taken out to the gates and gets taken out to the village. And these people are the first people to be able to get the benefit of this extra food and so on. So that's why they're there." He says, "Oh my goodness." He says, "You mean people get hurt like this?" He says, "Well, yeah, don't you remember when we were in and your cousin so and so, he fell off the horse and we never saw him again. Well, he could be out here someplace. He was taken out, so you didn't see any kind of the misery that what he's going through." Well, Prince Siddhartha was amazed by this. He says, "This would happen? This could happen to me?" He says, "Sure." He says, "You're a human being like me and like everybody else, and you could be injured like that." Prince Siddhartha says, "This is incredible." He says, "Let's go back into the palace. I want to be protected from this. I don't want to see this." So they go back in, and nobody says anything. Nobody knows anything that they went and so on. So after a period of time, um, his wife, Yashodhara, now gets pregnant. And whoa, everybody is thrilled. This is going to be great. Now we have a royal child that we can expect that is going to be keep on with the tradition and so on. This is magnificent. So so in the early part of the pregnancy, uh, Siddhartha gets up enough courage to say, "I want to go back out of the gate. I want to go into the village. I want to understand what's happening further out into the village." So he goes to his attendant and persuades his attendant again to take him out. The attendant, tries to to decline the offer, but Siddhartha, prevails, and they go outside the gate again in the middle of the night. And they go deeper, they go right through the village, and they get to the far side of the village. And in the far side of the village, they find all these people there who have all kinds of, they're walking with canes, they're kind of hunched over, they have gray, white hair, they have long, scraggly beards, their skin is kind of sagging, their color doesn't look quite right, they don't speak very clearly. So Arthur says, "Well, who are these people? What is this?" He says, "Well, this is where all the old people come to live." He says, "Old people?" He says, "What do you mean, old people?" He says, "Well, we human beings, as we get older, we begin to change. Our bodies begin to lose their strength, and our hair begins to turn colors, and we have to walk with a cane with help and so on, and we don't think very clearly. We can't speak as clearly as we used to be able to speak and so on. And this is what happens when we get old." And Siddhartha says, "Oh, well, this can't happen to me. I'm a prince." And his attendant says, "Oh, no." He says, "You're a human being, and this will happen to you just like it happens to everybody else." And the prince is just, "Oh, my goodness, what are you talking? This can't happen." He says, his mind is blown away. He says, let's go back to the palace. I don't want to deal with this. So they go back into the palace, and again, they get in without anybody knowing that they were gone, and their secret is kept and so on like that. So now they go back, and Siddhartha is thinking about this. He's thinking about the sick people who were at the gate. He's thinking about the village people. He's thinking about the people that were old and so on. He's thinking about that. And meanwhile, his wife Yasodhara, she's moving along in her pregnancy and so on, and about to give birth to the child. So so before the child is born, Siddhartha gets some more courage together and says, well, I want to go out, and I want to go out past all this. I want to go past the village, and I want to go see what these other land is like. I want to understand more about what my kingdom is going to be. So, of course, he goes to his attendant. The attendant says no, but Siddhartha prevails, and they get on their beautiful horses with all kinds of beautiful jewelry that they have. They're wearing their beautiful silks and brocades and everything. And the horses look magnificent with their jewel bridles and all the things that they have and everything. And they go out, and they go past the village, and they get out to the foothills of this mountains that was in the far distance. This was northern India, so they could see the Himalaya mountains in the distance, and there were foothills to approach those mountains and so on. And as they were approaching there, the sun was coming up. They were now, they were past the nighttime. The sun was coming up, and they could see in the distance that there was this procession. There was single file that was making its way, winding up the pathways up this foothill. And there was people in the front, and there's people in the back, and in the center is like this flat slab with what appeared to be a human being that was wrapped up all in white, that was laying on this slab that was being carried up this foothill. Siddhartha says to his attendant, what is that? He says, that's a funeral procession. They're making their way up to the cremation place. Siddhartha says, what are you talking about? He says, well, that's a dead person that's laying in there, and they've wrapped him up, and they're going to burn his body, and that's what happens when we die. Siddhartha says, when we die? What do you mean when we die? What does that mean? He says, well, you've seen people get sick, you've seen people get injured, you've seen people getting old. Well, at some point our body dies, our body stops working, and then when that happens, we have to do something with the body. We have to burn the body, otherwise it smells really bad, and people start getting sick around that body. So they have to do something to dispose of the body, and that's a funeral procession, and that's what you're seeing. He says, oh, well, that can't happen to me. He says, oh, of course. He says, you're a human being just like the rest of us, and that will happen to you. He says, oh my goodness, this is unbelievable. First, I'm going to get sick. Then I'm going to get injured. Then I'm going to get old. Now I'm going to die. This is unbelievable. I can't fathom this. Let's go back to the palace. So they swing around, and of course, they're out in these fields now, and they come by a woods. And the woods is, just the first part of what's a deeper forest, but he doesn't know the forest is there. He just sees the woods. And as they're passing by, he can hear singing. He can hear music. He can hear horns playing, and he can hear bells ringing, and he can hear drums being played, and he can hear this singing, this like chanting. He says, well, what's that? He says, well, let's get a little closer. And they get a little closer and they see this procession of people. It looks like they're all blue. And they're singing and they're chanting and they're laughing and they're rejoicing. They're very happy. And the closer he gets, he realizes they're all naked. And they got these blue bodies. And he says, well, what is this all about? So the attendant says, well, he says, I've heard about these people. These are the ascetics. These are the very, very religious people who give up everything in life. They're the renunciates. They give up everything in life. They give up their jobs. They give up their families. They give up their clothing. They give up their food. They give up everything to go live out in the forest with a teacher, a guru, who teaches them religious things, how to meditate, and so on. And so Siddhartha says, oh, he says, wow, this really looks enjoyable. This looks like something that I might really find interesting, because I'm still trying to understand this question of the riddle of the truth of what is nirvana and what is peace, and why some people are suffering, why we see these people getting old, why we see these people getting sick, why we see people dying. Maybe there's an answer there that I would like to understand that more. So his attendant says, well, we were on our way back to the palace. We should get back to the palace. We're going to get back. We're going to have to get back in the middle of the night so nobody sees us. We'll have spent a whole day away from the palace. So we need to get back before anybody does miss us. So Siddhartha relents and they start making their way back. But he's thinking about this. And they go back into the palace, and lo and behold, right shortly thereafter, Yasodhara has the baby, and it's a baby boy. And his name is Rahula. And everybody is thrilled. Oh, this is so wonderful. How could this be any better? Now there's going to be an heir to the throne after Siddhartha. And this is wonderful. This is what we need to have. This is what's expected, and so on. So life goes on in the palace, and Siddhartha is always thinking about this, and his father is giving him more responsibility in the royal court and so on, and he's learning more about being a warrior, and he's still being attended to by his attendants and his harem and everything. So life is good, if you like that kind of lifestyle. But he's thinking about these ascetics. He's thinking about these renunciates and thinking, well, they might have something that this isn't satisfying me. And I see my child, and I see my wife, and I see myself as my father. I see myself as all this. And I'm not sure I want all this. I think there's something else that I want to recognize. There's something else I want to open my life up to. So he realizes that this is his opportunity before anything progresses along with his child getting older. And the older he gets, the more difficult it's going to be to leave him. The more responsibility he gets in the palace, the more difficult it's going to be to leave that. So he says, now's the time for me to leave and to go into the forest with those ascetics. So he tells his attendant, I want to go. The attendant says, oh no. He says, if I take you out there, for sure the king is going to chop off my head. He says, no. He says, I will write a letter to my father explaining everything, and so that you will have no responsibility in this. You're just giving me safe passage to get there. That's all. You're not going to be held responsible for this. So finally he relents, and they get on their magnificent horses, and they go to the edge of the woods and everything. And Siddhartha gets down and he starts taking off his beautiful clothing and he's giving it to the attendant. And he says, "Here, I want you to have this, and I want you to give this to my wife Yasodhara. I want you, you can have the horse. I want these things to go to my father. You know, I want all these things to happen. You know." And he's getting down and he's to get naked and so on. And then the final thing, he's got this royal ponytail. And he says, "Give me my knife." And he takes his knife and whack, he whacks off that royal ponytail. And this is like, you know, the most incredible thing because this is the symbol of his royalty. And to cut this off is the attendant is just shattered. He's crying and Siddhartha's crying and the emotion is just very high. So he makes the attendant go away. And then Siddhartha starts making his way into the woods. And it's not too long after that that he hears some singing and he moves towards the singing. And he finds these men who are there who have these blue bodies, completely naked, and who are playing these instruments and are chanting, singing these beautiful melodies and so on. And he says, "I am here. I want to understand who you are and what you do. I would like to be with you." He says, and they say, "Well, that's fine." He says, "You know, we'll take you to our guru, who is further in the woods and everything. And the way this works is we receive teachings from him. And he gives us the teachings and he makes sure that we get what we need in terms of our teachings and our practices. We collect food for him. We go into the village from time to time and we collect alms. We collect the food and we take it back to him. And that's how we help him. And so that's our arrangement." And he says, "Well," he says, I can do that. You know, well, that's fine. He doesn't tell them who he is. They don't know who he is. He says, "But how do you get those blue bodies?" He says, "Oh, the blue bodies." He says, we our fires and so on, we take the ashes and we spread them all over our bodies. And sometimes we go up to the the cremation places and we'll take the ashes from the cremations and we'll pour those all over there." But he really didn't know, he couldn't connect that. You know, he just saw that the body was going up there, but he never saw the cremation zone, so he didn't understand that. But that was part of their rituals. That was part of their practices. So they take him back to meet the guru, and the guru, you know, repeats the arrangement and everything and accepts him as a disciple and begins to teach him and so on. He says, "You know, I want to learn about, you know, the truth. I want to learn about the riddle of truth and of peace and of suffering and of nirvana and understand, you know, what this means to us, you know." So, okay, we'll talk about that. So he's there for some time, you know, months, maybe a year, you know, we don't know. He's there for some period of time. But after this period of time, he's disenchanted. The guru has said that he has taught him everything that he knows. But Siddhartha is not satisfied that he's getting this truth. It's not getting at the core of this spirituality that's kind of yearning in his heart. He wants to understand, why is there this suffering? What is it to be a human being? Why is there peace? Why is there suffering? You know, why does the peace become suffering? You know, why do we get old? All these things he's trying to understand. And this guru is not teaching him completely what he wants. So he decides to leave and he goes further into the forest and finds another group of ascetics and another guru. And he goes through the same thing. He asks this guru, "Will you teach me?" And they say, "Oh, yes, I can teach you more, and I think you'll be happy with us," and so on. So he spends, you know, some time with him, and he's left with the same question. He didn't get to the core of this. But meanwhile, he's learning how to meditate. He's learning how to contemplate. He's learning how to process what it is to be a human being, all these different aspects of what it is to be a human being, and why we are ascetics, and why they have to give up, all these things so they have time to think about all these things. If we had ordinary lives in the village or in the palace, we don't have time for all this stuff. So Siddhartha's processing all this. But after this time with this second guru, he's not getting anything that he wants, the core of what he wants. And he asks the guru, he says, well, I'm sorry. He says, I'm teaching you everything I know. He says, but there is another guru way deeper in the forest, and maybe you should go see him. He says, okay, I'll do that. So he leaves and he goes deeper into the heart of the forest, and he meets this other guru who has these other disciples and so on, and he is accepted into that group, and he's receiving teachings and deeper teachings than he's ever had before, but still he's not having this personal experience of this knowledge, of this understanding that he's looking for. So after this period of time now with this third guru, he says, I'm sorry, it's not working for me. He says, maybe you need to be on your own. So our life is a life of renunciation. We eat very meagerly. We drink very meagerly. We live very meagerly. We don't need a lot of things. And our salvation, our redemption comes when we die. And what we're doing is we're preparing ourselves for our death. And because we are becoming, we're not doing anything to sustain our life, just the very, very minimum that we need, just what we need to be able to eat for today, what we need to be able to drink for today. We're not thinking about tomorrow or anything like that. So he's explaining to him this whole point of being a renunciate, why we are ascetics, because the realization of life, of truth, comes when we die. Says, well, okay, if that's what it is, I'll have to experience that, but I think that there's something else going on and I need to be able to understand it, and I'm going to take you up on your offer that I should go off by myself. So he decides to go up into the foothills, deeper up into the foothills, up into the mountains where there are caves and there are trees and there are places that he can go and be alone. And there are 5 other friends that he has made in this group who kind of empathize with Siddhartha and say, yes, that makes a lot of sense to me too. And I'd like to join Siddhartha. I'd like to go up and experience this as well. So Siddhartha says, well, you can come with me, but everybody's got to be on their own. I'm not going to be responsible for you. I don't want you to be responsible for me. They say, oh, yeah, that's fine. That's great, So they make their way and they go up into, up into these foothills, and there's caves and there's trees and so on. And Siddhartha finds this cave that he spends 6 years in. And these 6 years, he'll build a fire in there and he'll get some food. Sometimes he'll go down the village and he'll get some rice and bring it back, and he'll limit himself. Say he has a couple handfuls of rice, and so he'll decide that he's just going to eat 1 handful this week and another handful the next week, and then he's going to go down into the village and get some more, and he'll get a bottle of water, collect a vase of water or something, and that's all he'll have, and he'll exist off of that. And he goes through this, for 6 years he's going through this. And as he does that, he's reducing the amount of food that he collects. He's going down to the village less and less often. And instead of having just 1 palmful of rice for a week, he's getting down where he'll make that palmful last for a month. and the second palmful for the second month, and so on. And then he'll make it last for 2 months and 3 months and 4 months and so on like that. And he becomes emaciated. After these 6 years, he becomes just completely skin and bones. At this time, he's like 30 some years old. So he had a very strong body when all this started. I mean, after all, he came from the palace and he was strong. He had everything he needed. He was a royal person and everything. And now he's become completely emaciated. And he can't meditate like he used to. He's too weak. He can't think like he used to. He's too weak. And his body, he can barely sit up. He's too emaciated. He can barely stand and walk. He's so emaciated. And after 6 years of this, he says, I may be closer to death. And maybe the guru said that this is what will bring peace to us. This will bring happiness to us. But I'm not agreeing with it. This doesn't make sense to me. I can't think anymore. I can't practice anymore. I can't even stand up anymore. He says, "No, I'm leaving and I'm going down into the village." So he starts making his way down into the village, and he passes by, his 5 friends who are in their own hermitages, in their own places of practice, and they become emaciated themselves and so on. And they said, Siddhartha, where are you going? He says, I'm going back down to the village. He says, this isn't working for me. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I just really I feel that this is wrong. So they say, oh, Siddhartha, he says, this is what we've been waiting for. We're so close to death. This is what we need. This is what we're trying for. Then everything will be revealed to us. He says, nah, he says, I'm not so sure about that. He says, I'm going back down. He said, you guys stay here. I'm leaving. So he said, oh, don't go. He said, nope, I'm leaving. So they say, okay, we're staying. And he goes. He makes his way down to the valley because he's up in the mountains, and there's this bigger village. It's more like a town, almost a city that's nearby. And he makes his way through that. And he's making his way across a river wash. Do you know what a river wash is? During the monsoon seasons, whether it's in India or it's in America, where they just get a huge amount of rain in a very short period of time during the summer months or something like that. And these rivers, all this runoff comes. And then when it dries up after the monsoon is left, then there's this flat plateau, so to speak, that is this river wash, the small rocks that are all left behind, from that annual monsoon season. So he's making his way across this river wash of all these little stones. And I've been there. I've seen it. And I've been up to that cave. And he's making his way across there, whether he's walking or he's crawling, you can only imagine what this must be like. And very weak. And there's this goat herder girl, this young girl who has a goat with her, and she's got some rice with her. And she sees Siddhartha. She comes up to him and says, who are you? He says, oh, I've been up in the caves. Oh, we've heard of you. We in the village, over here in this town, we all know that there's holy people up there. And you're one of those holy people. Oh, this is magnificent. I offer you some food. You look terrible. And Siddhartha accepts it. And he had some yogurt and curds and the rice and the goat's milk and everything. And she stays with him there on the riverbed, for some time. And he rests and he starts feeling better. And then he starts making his way, the next day or whatever, he starts making his way, across that river wash, that riverbed. And the girl, in the meantime, has gone back to the village, back to the town, and she's telling everybody, "Oh, I met that holy guy that's up in the hills, and he took my food, he took the yogurt, and he took the rice, and he took the goat's milk and everything, and he's coming this way, he's coming this way." And all the townspeople said, "Oh, this is magnificent, this is great, this is wonderful." And they all got their things together and they started to meet him before he could even get to their town. And they were offering him all this food and everything, clothing to wear and everything. And he was accepting all of this. And there became all these shrines. If you go to this place, you can go visit where this is around this river wash. And there are these shrines where this particular family offered Siddhartha food. And then there's another one down here where this family offered it and so on. And people would come and they would pay homage to these statues and so on that they've erected in these places. I mean, this is very, very holy. This is the essence of the culture of Buddhism. This is magnificent. So he's accepting all this food, and he's getting stronger day after day. He's getting better, and he's gaining weight and so on, and he's feeling all better about himself, and this is very good. He's happy with himself about this, and he realizes that what he needs is his body. What he needs is his intellect. If he's going to be able to maintain a spiritual awareness, that these three go together. He can't shun his physical body. He can't shun his intellectualism, his ability to be able to think and contemplate. It's part of who we are. It's part of being a human being. We can't wish ourselves to die like that. It would be an empty death. It would be a false death. It would be a meaningless death. And it wasn't giving him the wisdom. It wasn't giving him the bliss. It wasn't giving him what he was searching for, in his heart center. So this was his yearning. This was something that he had from the very time that he was born. Remember, when he first, stood up and said, I am the way. I'm what's going to teach all you people how to succeed in life, what it is to be a human being. I am the greatest. So if he was to die before his time, how could he fulfill that prophecy? So as he got stronger and stronger, he said, now I'm getting to the point where I can go back to my meditation. So does anybody have any questions or comments right now? Anybody need to take a short drink or stand up and stretch? Okay.
Lance, a quick comment, perhaps. Well, two quick comments. The story that you told about right after the Buddha is a newborn and he stands up. I don't mean to bash other faith traditions. I really don't want to do that. But in Buddhism, it's not really a dogmatic belief system. So you are free to believe that or not believe that. And you could still be a Buddhist. Am I correct on that?
Correct.
Yeah. So it's just something to ponder. And the other thing is that some people say that, well, he shouldn't have left his son like that behind. However, it's important to remember he was not yet enlightened when he did that, when he left his son, and that he later on turned out to be a very engaged father. Just my understanding anyways.
Yes, thank you. And we'll get to those questions about that later on.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So yes.
Can I just ask something?
Yes.
So you made the point that he needed his physical body and his intellectual mind to get to that point of meditation. So
Yes.
does that, so what, I'm not quite sure how to ask this. So how does that translate for us? Like, or for humans today, like if someone were to have a mental illness or someone was suffering from dementia, so how do they how does that go hand in hand with their meditation?
Well, not everybody has a has a how would I say a good birth.
Hmm.
I mean, there's all different gradations of being a human being, but to have a noble human being birth, to have a precious human life, a precious human body is a very
Hmm.
special thing. And it's where these three things come together, where having a physical body, an intellectual contemplative mind, and a spiritual yearning within one's heart center,
Hmm.
this is what defines a precious human life. And we're going to talk about that in the next week as we continue on this discussion.
Okay.
So not every just because you're a human being doesn't mean that you have all these things working to your because there's other things that are happening too.
Mhm. Okay.
Is that okay? Can you sit with that for a little while?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So to continue the story now. So Siddhartha says, now I'm ready to pick up my meditation again. He's learned many meditation techniques when he was with his gurus in the forest, and he learned a lot of things, good things, and now it's time to resume that now with a proper physical body and intellectual mind. And so he finds this big fig tree. And he says, oh, well, this will protect me from this harsh sun. It will protect me from the rain. And it has a big, broad base. And I'm going to get some grass. And he pulls it over to the base of the trunk of the tree. And he says, this is where I'm going to sit. And this is where I'm going to meditate. And I'm not going to get up for this night. I'm going to spend this night in deep meditation. I'm going to resume my meditation in this nighttime. So he goes over and he gets himself comfortable. And so when he gets into the classic position and he begins to prepare himself to meditate, and he does that through watching the breath. And I think those of you who have been with us, these past number of weeks, months, years, whatever, one of the things that we have showed you is the watching the breath technique of meditation. And this is the very same technique that Buddha used, that Siddhartha used for his meditation, where you breathe in through both nostrils, your back is straight, and you're bringing the breath down to your navel, and you're holding the breath, and then you exhale and you force the air out, and you hold that breath, and then you repeat that. You breathe in fresh, clean, pure air, and you exhale stale, dark, negative air. And by doing that over and over and over again, as we've done it together, we probably only done it 5 times, maybe 10 times. But imagine doing that for hours on end. Imagine doing it for a day or 2 days or something, whenever the mind wanders, to bring it back to watching the breath. It's a technique of meditation that doesn't require anything. You don't need a candle. You don't need a picture. You don't need anything but just your living body and your ability to be able to breathe. So it is the bare essentials of being a human being, using your physical body and your intellect to be able to focus on relaxation, one-pointed mindfulness that opens up the heart center. And the heart center is our spiritual center. So this is where it comes from. So he engages in his watching the breath. And as he's doing that, things are settling down, things are getting quiet within himself and so on. And he goes into a deep meditation. And then this demon arises up in front of him. And this demon is very powerful and very authoritative. And he says, oh, Siddhartha, he says, why are you sitting here like this? You're wasting your time. You could be back in the palace. You could be with your family. You could be the next king. You will be a great leader among men, among kings, among all the people, and you will be the Lord of master of all the area that you can possibly see. You will be master of all that. All you have to do is stop doing this, get up out of this meditation and follow me. And we shall go to the royal palace and you take up your position as a royal king. Siddhartha looks at him and he thinks, I grew up in that atmosphere. I remember all the intrigue that was going on, all the political games that was being played, to be able to convince people to back me and to support me, and that I would give them support, but the lies that were being told, and the way in which we did this and everything. He says, no, he says, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in a simple way of life. I'm interested in peace and in blissfulness and in happiness. And it doesn't involve all those games that you have to play as a royal person. He says, no, he says, I'm not going to do that. He says, you get behind me. And the demon disappears. And Siddhartha says, oh, okay. He goes back into his meditation, peace of mind, goes back into his breathing. And he goes deeper into his meditation, deeper into a samadhi, that mindset of peacefulness. And he goes deeper than he's been before. And he's sitting there in this blissful feeling, and then all of a sudden, another demon arises up in front of him. And this demon is so fierce. This demon has fire coming out of his eyes and out of his nose and out of his mouth, and lightning out of his fingertips. And he's got great armor and he's got great weapons all around him. He says, oh, Siddhartha, why are you sitting here like this, wasting your time? You could be with me. You are the greatest warrior. You will be the most magnificent warrior in all of India, and all the land will be all yours from your power. You will have armies that will go follow you everywhere. You will have riches that you can't imagine from being able to take from other people and other kingdoms and so on. All you have to do is follow me, and you will have all of this. Siddhartha thinks about this for a minute and says, well, he says, when I was back in the palace and I was learning all those martial arts, and I was learning, all those things that I would do and how people would disappear. And then I saw them, being injured and broken bones and everything. No, I've seen that, and it brings great harm. It brings great physical suffering to people. He says, no, I'm not interested in that. I want peace. I want happiness. I want love for all beings. No, I don't want that. He says, you get behind me. And that demon disappears. Siddhartha says, oh, okay. Goes back into his meditation, using his breathing, watching the breath, goes deeper now than he's been before. And he goes and he's there for a long time. And then all of a sudden, this other demon arises. And this demon arises is this beautiful dancing girl. And she is so beautiful and so voluptuous and has such moves, such motions that is so enticing and intoxicating. And says, oh, Siddhartha, why are you sitting here? You could be with me and we could do such wonderful things. We can have such wonderful pleasures together. Why are you sitting here in this miserable place? out in the elements. We can be in the middle of silk and all these beautiful things and have all these great feelings of ourselves together and everything. Why are you doing this? And he thinks back to himself, and he thinks about when he was back in the palace, and he thinks about all the stuff that was happening in the harem, all the things that were happening with the attendants, and the jealousies, and the envies, and the desires, and all the things that were going on, and all the games that were being played in people's lives and so on, and the hatred that was coming out of it, and the bad feelings and the confusion and everything. He says, no. He says, I understand what that is. I'm not interested in that. I want peace. I want simplicity for all beings, for myself. This is what I want. No, you get behind me. And just like that, the demon of pleasure, the demon of desire dissolves. He says, oh. And now he goes back into his meditation yet again. And this time he goes deeper than he's ever been before, deeper than he ever imagined was possible. And he just completely loses himself in this meditation where he sees all the past lives of all beings. He sees all the present lives of all beings. He sees all the future lives as all beings. And he's in the midst of all of this. And he sees all of the controlling external things that people bring into their lives. And he sees how to control those things, how those things can just pass right through, how he can pass through objects where nothing becomes an impediment to whatever movement he wishes to make in any way. He becomes a pure spiritual being. And he realizes that he sees all the causes of suffering as all these things that we can contrive of within our minds. He sees all this happiness that is possible. He sees that is possible from releasing all these sufferings in the mind. And he sees that the mind is at the core of all of this confusion, the cause of all this suffering, the cause of all this happiness. And he sees that he needs to be responsible for whatever happiness he has, whatever suffering he has. And he begins to recognize that he is one with, that all this is all pervasive, and that everything with his physical body, including his brain, is all part of this physical body, this physical, all these forms, all these things that we see, the stars in the sky, the earth, the sun, the moon, other beings, all the animals. And he sees the connectivity of all of this all together. So by this time, the sun starts coming up. He's opened his eyes and he's looking around, and he hasn't lost this awareness. It is with him. And he looks at himself and he sees himself in a way that he hasn't seen himself. He sees himself in this radiance, in this balance, in this level of being a human being that he hadn't experienced before, that was free of confusion. It was being awakened. And the Buddha was prophesized. The Buddha was part of the religion that he grew up in, of the Jains and the Hindu, the ancient traditions and everything. They prophesied that there would be this great being, there would be this Buddha who would be awakened and would bring these teachings and would bring the way to be able for human beings to be able to be realized as awakened. And he realized that this is what he experienced. So he was just like basking in this light of this awareness of this and seeing all things and recognizing all things just as they are, no complications. So he starts getting up and he says, well, what am I going to do with this? And he starts pacing up and down. And there's this, so this was all outside the city of Gaya, Gaya, which is in northeast India. So I was there. And this particular suburb of Gaya is called Bodh Gaya. And Bodh Gaya is this place where Siddhartha attained enlightenment. He sat under that tree and attained enlightenment. Bud means Bodhi. Bodhi means enlightenment. So Bodh Gaya, Bodhi Gaya, enlightenment Gaya. So he's just kind of pacing up and down. And there's this magnificent place where you can go to this walkway and see, and there's flowers that come up with each one of his footfalls. And shortly thereafter, his friends, those 5 friends that were up in the foothills with him, they come down and they see him and they say, oh my goodness. He says, Siddhartha, you've changed. What has happened to you? You have a golden body. You are radiating this light. Have you attained enlightenment? And he doesn't answer. He doesn't speak. And he just has this aura about himself. And they say, oh, Siddhartha, teach us everything that you've learned. Teach us how to attain enlightenment. You have become the Buddha. That's what we've been all looking for, is the enlightened one, the awakened one. That's what we've been wanting. Teach us what it is. How can we do that? He doesn't speak, but there's the villagers are coming over and they're offering food to Siddhartha. They're offering food to these 5 friends, and he's indicating to them that they should be eating and so on. So they start eating, but they keep beseeching him to teach them. So Siddhartha, he's walking up and down and thinking, I can't even talk. My mind is just blown away. I can't even put thoughts together. How can I explain this to anybody? How can I explain seeing all past lives, these lives, and future lives? How can I explain all this stuff? It's I don't know how to do it. So for 2 weeks, he paces up and down this walkway. And then he decides, well, I should go to Varanasi. Varanasi is the holiest city in India. And Varanasi is the place where all the Hindus want to go to be cremated, where they want to go die and be cremated. It's the holiest place. It's on the River Ganges. And you probably have seen pictures or films about, on these steps that they've got, and they build these great funeral pyres and so on like that. And those that can't be burned because they don't have enough money, they just throw the bodies in the water and so on. So this is where I should go, he thinks to himself. It's the holiest place in India. This is where I should be. So he walks. It takes several days to get there. He's walking. His 5 friends are following him, saying, oh, Siddhartha, teach us. And he's just keep him going. And he gets to Varanasi, and there's nothing for him. He just walks right through. He's just not moved. He's not motivated to stay. He just says, I'm just walking. And he walks right through it, and he goes through to the western side of Varanasi, and he gets to like a suburb that is called Sarnath. He gets to Sarnath, and there is this park called Deer Park. I've been there. And it's this great meadow, and there are these sal trees. And he gets underneath the sal tree. He sits underneath the sal tree, And he motions to his 5 friends, and he motions to them to sit in front of him, like in a semicircle. And he says, now I'm going to teach you the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma. I'm going to give you the first teaching. It took him 7 weeks, 49 days, from the time that he sat underneath the fig tree that night, attained enlightenment. It took him 49 days to get to this point, to be in Deer Park in Sarnath, to start teaching. And he says, I can't tell you what it is. It's beyond words. It's beyond expression. There's no way I can explain it to you. The only thing that you can do is to experience it for yourself. And the only thing I can do to help you is to teach you how I did it, what went on in my life, what I thought about, what I meditated upon, to be able to have that experience. That's what I can teach you. So the first turning of the wheel, the first turning of this wheel of truth, these 4 noble truths, is what it's been called. The 4 truths is what it's been called. It's been kind of westernized and called the 4 noble truths. But in the ancient scriptures, it's just called the 4 truths. And the 4 truths, so the first one is that all life has suffering. It doesn't matter who we are. It doesn't matter whether we're rich or we're poor, we're a man or we're a woman, we're young or we're old, we're an animal or we're a human being, we're an insect. All beings have suffering. It doesn't necessarily mean that their entire life is suffering. But what it means is that everything that we are, everything that we have, our physical body, we may be enjoying it for this period of time, but at some point it's going to change, and it's going to change into suffering. We're going to get old, we're going to get sick, we're going to get injured, and we're going to die. And those things have suffering as being all pervasive in them. The second truth is that we cause this suffering from our desire. If we didn't have desire, if we didn't want to have this body, if we didn't want to have these things, there wouldn't be any suffering. But because we have desire, because we want to be reborn as a human being, a better human being than the one that we are now, or that we want these things, and to get these things, we have committed evil deeds to be able to get these things and to be able to support ourselves in this life and everything, that we will have to suffer the consequences of those things. So the cause of the suffering is our desire, our ignorance, our hatred, our jealousies, and our greed. The third teaching was the cessation. How do we stop this? Why are we going through this over and over again? And how can we stop this? What is the cessation? How can we stop? And the cessation is that we simply stop. We stabilize our resolve, and we just stop doing negative things. We stop doing unwholesome things. We become pure. We become pure spiritually. And we can become the embodiment of that. Just as we are the embodiment of that suffering, we can be the embodiment of stopping the suffering, just to become pure bliss, to become pure happiness. And then the suffering goes away. And we can do that as a human being. But then the question is, well, how do I do that? And that's the fourth truth, the Eightfold Path. And last week we talked about this in 101. We talked about the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is a system by way we can analyze our life at any particular point. And we can ask ourselves 8 questions, if you want to phrase it that way. We can look at ourselves with 8 markers that indicate where are we causing cessation of suffering, or are we causing suffering itself? And then taking responsibility for that. So if you remember, the Eightfold Path was right view. Right view was freedom. The second one was right resolve. Right resolve was like protection. Then the third one was right speech, was always telling the truth. The fourth one is right conduct, behavior, always doing good deeds. Then the fifth one was right livelihood, being connected with other beings and doing right job. And then the sixth one was right effort, to always be moving forward, to always be doing things with virtue, to not do negative things, to be aware of the difference and being able to have the correct effort to be doing good things. And then the sixth one was right mindfulness, to develop our cognizance, our awareness of what it is that we are doing, taking responsibility for it, processing what it is that is happening in our lives and so on, and giving ourselves the right mindfulness of that responsibility. And then the eighth one was right concentration, or, right absorption, like a vase, that we become all involved in this, that this becomes who we are. We become the embodiment of this enlightenment, of this freedom, of all the other aspects. This is the cause for the cessation. We all have enlightenment within us. We are all Buddha. We all have the potential to recognize that Buddha. We have that nature within us. We are all good beings. All the animals are good beings. All the insects are all good beings. There's no difference between good and bad. It's our mind that makes those differences, that creates the duality. And it's this eightfold path that allows us to recognize that through the mindfulness and through the other practices. And then through that, we're able to cut through our dualism. We're able to cut through the causes of the dualism, which is the desire to have this life, to have this body, and therefore then we cut through the suffering. So that was the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. Now, of course, I just said all that in 10 minutes or so. There's much more to it. And we will talk about that. We'll begin the conversation with that. But it also requires your own personal investigation, your own personal commitment to be able to process that into your enlightenment. Nobody can do it for you. The Buddha can't do it for you. The Buddha is the Sanskrit word for awakened one. Awakened to all this, to awaken to all these potentials, to be able to see the past lives, the present lives, and see all the things that makes all these things up. Any questions or comments right now? So sometime thereafter, his 5 friends became his first 5 disciples. And they traveled with him the rest of their lives, the rest of his life. They would travel around. They went around all around northern India, which was parts of India as it is today and parts of Nepal and so on. But it was all, relatively confined to those areas. He was born in Lumbini, and he began teaching in Sarnath, and he had favorite places that he would go, and he was about 35 years old or so when he attained enlightenment at this point. And they began to call him Sakyamuni. That became his name, Buddha Sakyamuni. They recognized him as the Buddha, and and the name Sakyamuni. Shakya was the family clan, and Shakya, well, it was just that simple. It was just a family clan, and Muni means sage. So it's sage of the Munis. So that's how he got the name Shakyamuni. So he was referred to as Buddha Shakyamuni. And then he began to teach at his favorite places. He would travel from villages, but then during the monsoon seasons, during the summertime, he would go to places and there would be benefactors, there would be kings or whatever, who would build these great pavilions for him, or, places that had some kind of roof or something like that, so that he could have his followers join him in these pavilions, protected from the rains and the sunlight and all that kind of stuff. And he could be giving teachings, and he would teach the 3 baskets, which we talked about last week. The teaching of the discipline, the teaching of the devotion, of the emptiness, and the teaching of the wisdom. And he would teach these things simultaneously to all these beings, and certain beings would hear the discipline, some would hear about the devotion, some would hear the teaching about wisdom. But they were all being taught at the same time. But the words meant certain things to certain people who were ready to be able to hear them. So he spent the next 50 years or so traveling around giving these teachings. And he would listen to the villagers. He would listen to the people that would come. They would want to come and confess to him. They would want to come and ask him questions, and he would invite them. That was part of the process of the teaching. It's not just lecturing all the time. It's entering into a dialogue with people, one on one or in a group. And he would have these conversations with people, and he realized, or he saw, that there was all these different emotions that people were confessing to him. So it became evident, it's part of the teaching now, that they say that there's 84,000 emotions. So if you can imagine over his lifetime how many people he met, and each one had their own combination of emotions at a particular point in time. So this 84,000 becomes this number that is I think, a symbolic number that just represents the multiplicity, the multitude of all these different possibilities, combinations, these 84,000 emotions. But what became obvious too was that these 84,000 emotions could be broken down, could be subsumed into smaller categories until it got down to the 5 basic poisons. The 5 basic poisons of the emotions. And we've talked about this. We've talked about there's ignorance, which is the overarching, all pervading poison, the cause of our suffering is ignorance. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know that we have desire. We don't know that we have hatred. We don't know that we have jealousy. We don't know that we have greed. But those other four are the other parts of that ignorance that create these five poisons. So those five poisons together and all the myriad combinations make up these 84,000 emotions that are the things that block up our heart center. And it's our heart center where our true nature is. That's where our Buddha is, in our heart center, not the fleshy part of our heart, but it's that energy that's in our heart. You know, when we feel love, when we recognize love, it doesn't happen up here. It happens in here, and we get that achy feeling that we call love, whether it's for our parents, our brothers and sisters, our friends, our lovers. When it's true, it's here. And we all have that. And so that's the outer, that's the coarse love. But then there's this inner love for all beings, for all things, this compassion that is here, this joy that is here, this equanimity, this sameness, this balance of all things is here. This bodhicitta is the holy enlightened mind. The holy enlightened mind is this big mind. This is the little mind. So the little mind produces all these emotions that covers up and blocks up this true nature. So it's our job is to remove, to identify all those blockages, the causes of the blockages, and then we start getting shoots of light, of wisdom, of love, compassion, joy, and equanimity shining through. And we say, oh, there it is. It's within me. It was there the whole time. But now I have a way, I have a system by which I can begin to recognize that for myself. So that system is called the Dharma. And the Dharma is what is taught by the Buddha. So the Buddha is like the heart that's inexpressible, non-conceptual. But then to help us to understand it, he's able to vocalize, he's able to intellectualize that which leads to this heart, to this big mind, to open it up. And that's the Dharma. So when we see the word Dharma with a capital D, that refers to the Buddha Dharma. Dharma is a pathway in Sanskrit. So there's lots of different pathways. There's a pathway to become a carpenter. There's a pathway to become a doctor. There's a pathway to become a mother and a father. There's many different dharmas, which are lowercase d. But the Buddha Dharma is an uppercase d. And that is the intellectualization of this heart mind, of this holy enlightened mind, of this bodhicitta. And then our physical body is what holds this all together, is the actualization of that. The body of the Buddha, we say. So the Buddha continued to teach for almost 50 years and traveled around. And he was in a little village called Kusinagara in northern India. And he was there and he ate some spoiled food, some bad food. And it may not have been intentional. There were threats on his life, you know, during his time of teaching and so on. But he reached this point here, and he was 84 years old, 83 years old, something like that. And maybe, you know, his physical body just didn't have the strength to be able to deal with that spoiled food. So it may not have been intentional that he was giving it to him, but it was his time to go. And he accepted that and realized that. And so he began to give his last teaching. and he laid on his right side. And maybe you've seen pictures of the reclining Buddha with his head is on his right hand and he's on his side and his feet are together. And he gave this last teaching. And of course, he's surrounded by 500 disciples or whatever, and they're all pleading with him, oh please, Buddha, please don't go, we need you to continue to teach and everything, where will we be without you and everything. And he teaches this last teaching, so I'm going to read this to you, and it's in these books here. Some of you I know have this book, but it's in this book. It's in the first section are the 12 principal deeds of the Buddha, which is what I just related to you. But on page 2 at the bottom there, on number 12, and this is what the Buddha said to his disciples. He says, behold, O disciples, now I exhort you. All compounded, conditioned things have their nature of constant flux, and they are subject to change. Strive on ardently with your mindfulness to complete your tasks. So that was his telling everybody, now it's time for you to wake up. Now it's time for you to practice all these things, to put these things together, to be able to go through all the combination of things, to be able to analyze and break things apart, put them back together again, and be stable and become Buddha yourself. Strive on ardently with your mindfulness to complete your tasks. So, and the task is to bring the Dharma to all sentient beings. So then he passed, and they had a great cremation for him. And by this time, his teachings had spread, all through India, moved through into Ceylon, the island Ceylon, moved over into Southeast Asia, and also moved up through northern India and moved up through the Stanic countries that I related at the beginning of this talk, and went over into Mongolia and into China and so on. So word spread, very quickly that the Buddha had passed, and all the great leaders, or so many of the great leaders of those different sects now of the Buddha, came for his cremation. And they had this great cremation, and they and the relics are the fragments, the teeth and the hair and the bones and so on, things that were left behind in the fire that obviously came from the human body that was burned. And they were disseminated among these great leaders. And in many of the different holy places that you can go around the world, they may, claim that, oh, here is a relic of the Buddha. Here's his one tooth, or here is some hair, or something like that. And I was there. I was in Kusinagar, and I saw, they erected a great stupa, a very special stupa, a building, which is like a requilarium, where they deposit the relics. And so where he was cremated. And so I saw that. And so all this is part of taking a pilgrimage to go to these holy sites of the Buddha, where he taught, where he was born, where he passed, where he was cremated, and so on like that. So that, in a brief story, is the Buddha's life. All the teachings, the sutras, are the literal teachings of the Buddha. It's like the Gospels of the Buddha. So We can read those, we can study those. There's a website where you can go. Not all of them have been translated into English, although it is an ongoing process where they're working on it all the time. And it is magnificent to read the actual teachings of the Buddha, the words he said. And we can talk about how that manifested. But our time has come. So, are there any questions or comments that you would like to bring up right now? Yes, Gavin, I see you turned on your microphone.
Yeah, I just wanted to say how beautiful the story was. I was looking forward to it, and it was so beautiful. So thank you for telling it. And
Are you do you been in Kingdom Mustang?
No, I haven't been to the Stanic countries, but I do know that
Mhm.
it has traveled up through there. You can look on Google or whatever, and you can see maps of
Yeah.
how the Buddhism flowed, through the world during his lifetime.
Mhm.
did it reach Japan in his lifetime?
I think so. I'm not a scholar, so I can't say for sure 100%, but I do
Right.
think it made it to the Far East. I think it made it to China, it made it to Korea, and it made it to Japan. It wasn't Japan. The Shinto tradition was the indigenous religion in Japan. So Buddhism would have been a very small group of people in Japan at that time. It was much more
Oh
accepted in
wow!
China.
Mhm.
Awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, it's such a powerful story. I thank you so much. It was such a blessing. So
Thank
just wanted to
you.
say thank you.
So good. Thank you. I hope you could understand, what we were
Yeah.
trying to point out was, this is the human experience. And
Mhm.
by being able to recognize taking responsibility and being able to identify the powers, the demons that come up are our own demons.
Mhm.
Right.
Lance, you had mentioned we were talking about the birth of the Buddha, and it occurs to me that yes, there's something to be said for non-dogmatism, but at the same time, if I get caught up in this very Western, did this happen or not, you kind of miss the point, don't you? That you were trying to make earlier.
Yes. Yes. Look at it in your own life. And every meditation is a death and a rebirth. Beza, did you have any comments? What do you think?
No, I thought it was beautiful. I knew most of the story, but I definitely want to read about it in more detail.
Okay, good. Well, there's many books you can read about it. Thank you. Matt, how about
Mhm.
you? Did you have any comments?
I don't think so. Like just what everyone else was saying, it was quite a beautiful retelling of the Buddha's story. It was cool. Yeah, I really, yeah, it was great.
Good. All right, thank you. Emma, how about you? Did you enjoy that?
I did a lot. Thank you very much. I had some technical difficulties and I missed some of the first teaching. And I was going to ask about that. Did you cover like the noble truths and the eightfold path and things? I would have loved to hear your interpretation, but yeah, technical difficulties for
Well,
10 minutes
we
or so.
recorded it and we're going
Oh,
to put it on YouTube. So you'll be able to watch it and listen to it again if you like.
wonderful. Thank you very much.
So you should send me your email or your phone number would be best if you can send me that, and I can invite you to join our chat group on WhatsApp.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to chat right now and it's only going to Lance, I guess.
Well, if you go chat and you just bring that up, and there's a place to there's a chat box or something. Just come up.
Yeah, it's only going to Lance. I'm trying to change it, but
Well, let it go to me. That's all right. You can
oh,
let it go to.
that is you. Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Yeah, no, great talk.
All
Thank you
right.
for having me. Yeah.
Well, next week we'll continue. We'll begin our investigation of the jewel ornament liberation.
Sounds
Vikram,
great.
how did this land on you? Did you enjoy this talk?
I definitely did. Thank you. It made me think about my time in Varanasi. I got to spend time and stay at Sarnath, where like
Oh,
the Buddha gave his first sermon, like you went into. So it brought me back to that. So thank you.
well, very good. Were you on a trip, or are you originally from from India?
My mom is Indian, and we come from a Hindu tradition that's focused on Tara. So
Uh-huh.
the deity that's also in Tibetan Buddhism, and that's what brought me to more to Buddhism over time.
Well, good. Well, thank you for joining us. I hope you choose to join us, for our continuing one-on-one talks.
Definitely. Thank you.
Okay. If you want to send me your phone number, and I can send you the link to
Sure.
get onto our chat group, and you might find that helpful.
Definitely. I just sent it over in the
Uh,
chat.
All right, very good. So we have some books, and I can send those. I can send some books to you, and you can purchase some other books. Some of the bigger, heavy textbooks you can purchase online from a couple different places. So we'll be talking about those as we go. I try and keep to our time schedule, so I don't want to keep everybody late than they plan to. So at this time, I would like to do a dedication for this talk, and then I can stay online for a little bit longer if anybody has more questions or comments that you'd like to talk about. And then, okay, so we go to our prayer books. If you have the prayer books, and I can screen share this. So here, I presume everybody can see. Whoops, that's the wrong one. This one. This is called the Dedication Prayer by Lord Jigden Sumgun. So Lord Jigden Sumgun is the founder of our lineage, the Drikung Kagyu lineage. So we recite this prayer out loud together. It only takes a minute or so. So please join us with this. Glorious, holy, venerable, precious kind root and lineage lamas, divine assembly of yidams and assemblies of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, yogins, yoginis, and dakinis dwelling in the 10 directions, please hear my prayer. May the virtues collected in the 3 times by myself and all sentient beings in samsara and nirvana and the innate root of virtue not result in the 8 worldly concerns, the 4 causes of samsara, or rebirth as a Sravaka or Pratyeka Buddha. May all mothers, sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me and mine, obstructors who harm, misleading Maras, and the hordes of demons, experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly attain the unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. By the power of this vast root of virtue, may I benefit all beings through my body, speech, and mind. May the afflictions of desire, hatred, ignorance, arrogance, and jealousy not arise in my mind. May attachment to fame, reputation, wealth, honor, and concern for this life not arise for even a moment. May my mind stream be moistened by loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta, and through that may I become a spiritual master with good qualities equal to the infinity of space. May I gain the supreme attainment of Mahamudra in this very life. May the torment of suffering not arise even at the time of my death. May I not die with negative thoughts. May I not die confused by wrong view. May I not experience an untimely death. May I die joyfully and happily in the great luminosity of the mind as such and the pervading clarity of Dharmata. May I, in any case, gain the supreme attainment of Mahamudra at the time of death or in the bardo. Om. Excuse me 1 second. Om, ah, hum. Om, ah, hum. Om, ah, hum. May my body, speech, and mind become inseparable with the body, speech, and mind of all the enlightened ones for the benefit of all sentient beings. Thank you all very much for joining us tonight. Happy full moon. And
Thanks.
you.
Take care, everybody.
Thursday night, we will do Medicine Buddha at the same time, 7 o'clock. And if you can join us, that is a Buddhist practice for healing, Medicine Buddha for healing. And we all have one sickness or another. So everybody's welcome for that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Lance.
Thank you.
Good,
You're
everybody.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, Lance.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you. Karina, thank you. Vikram. Okay. Shri Bye-bye.